Inflation is a word we hear all the time on the news and social media debates, and especially when we go to buy something and realize, wait, wasn't this cheaper last year? Why is everything getting more expensive? Well, that's inflation in action. But what exactly is inflation and why does it happen? That's what we're going to break down today in the simplest way possible. At its core, inflation is the rate at which prices for goods and services increase over time. Imagine walking into a store today and buying a gallon of milk for $3. Now fast forward a year, and that same gallon of milk costs $3.50. That extra 50 cents, that's inflation. It means the same amount of money buys less than it did before. Now, you might be thinking, why does this happen? Is someone just randomly deciding to raise prices? Well, not exactly. There are three main reasons why inflation happens: demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and the money supply. Let's break them down one by one. Demand pull inflation. This type of inflation happens when there's a surge in demand for goods and services, but not enough supply to meet that demand. Think of it like concert tickets. If your favorite artist announces a world tour and millions of fans rush to buy tickets, the prices skyrocket because there are only so many seats available. The same thing happens in the economy. If more people have money to spend, businesses increase their prices because they know people are willing to pay more. A real-world example: look at the housing prices. When lots of people want to buy a house, but there aren't enough homes available, the prices shoot up. This has happened in many cities where demand for housing outspaces supply, making home prices and rent increase dramatically. Another example, the gaming industry. Ever notice how when a brand new console drops, like the PlayStation 5 or the latest graphic card, prices go crazy? That's because everyone wants one, but there aren't enough in stock. Higher demand, limited supply, higher prices. That's demand pull inflation at work. Cost push inflation. The second cause of inflation happens on the supply side. When it becomes more expensive to produce goods and services, businesses have no choice but to raise prices. This is called cost push inflation. Let's say you own a bakery. One day, the price of flour and sugar doubles. Now, since your costs have increased, you either have to raise the price of your bread or make less profit. Most businesses will choose to increase prices, passing the cost on to consumers. You see this all the time in industries that rely on raw materials like gas and oil. When gas prices go up, the cost of transportation increases. That means everything that needs to be delivered, like groceries, clothing, and electronics, also get more expensive. That's cost push inflation. Here's a real-world example. The 2021 supply chain crisis had shipping delays, labor shortages, and factory shutdowns, and it made it more expensive to manufacture and transport goods. That led to higher prices for everything from furniture to cars. Even fast food chains raised their menu prices because food and labor costs went up. The money supply and inflation. Now let's talk about money. You might wonder, why don't we just print more money so everyone has enough? Well, that would actually make things worse. If too much money enters the economy without an increase in goods and services, the value of money drops. Think of it like this. Imagine if every single person suddenly got $1 million. At first, it seems great. Everyone is rich. But now, since everyone has more money, businesses realize they can charge more for everything. That's how hyperinflation happens. A famous example is Zimbabwe in the early 2000s. The government printed so much money that it became worthless. Prices skyrocketed and people had to carry trillions of Zimbabwean dollars just to buy groceries. At one point, a loaf of bread cost hundreds of billions of Zimbabwe dollars. A similar situation happened in Germany in the 1920s after World War I. The government printed massive amounts of money, causing extreme inflation. People literally had to carry wheelbarrows full of cash to buy basic necessities. The money was so worthless that some people used it as wallpaper or burned it for heat. Now, this is how the government controls inflation. So, if inflation can get out of hand, how do governments control it, you might ask? The most common way is by adjusting interest rates. When inflation is too high, the Federal Reserve, or central banks in other countries, raises the interest rate. This makes borrowed money more expensive. If loans are harder to get, people and businesses spend less, which slows down inflation. It's like turning down the heat when a pot of water is about to boil over. Another method, reducing the money supply. If there's too much money in the economy, central banks can remove it by selling government bonds or increasing bank reserve requirements. Less money in circulation means price stability. One more way inflation is controlled is through wage policy and price regulation. In extreme cases, some governments put price caps on essential goods like food and fuel to stop them from getting too expensive. But this only works short term because businesses can't afford to keep prices low forever. Now let's talk about you. How does inflation impact your everyday life? First, it affects your purchasing power. If your paycheck stays the same but rent, groceries, and gas all get more expensive, you can afford less than before. That's why wages need to keep up with inflation. Otherwise, people struggle to afford the same thing. Second, inflation affects savings. If you're keeping all your money in saving accounts, inflation eats it away at its value over time. Let's say you saved $1,000 today. If inflation is 5% per year, that same $1,000 will only have the buying power of like $950 next year. That's why some people invest in stocks, real estate, or other assets that grow in value over time. It also affects loan and debt. If inflation is high, the value of money decreases over time. That means if you have a fixed rate loan like a mortgage, you're technically paying less in real value as inflation rises. But on the flip side, if interest rates go up, it becomes more expensive to borrow money. So you might think to yourself, what can you do? Or how do I protect myself? Here are a few ways to stay ahead of inflation. Number 1, invest wisely. Stocks, real estate, and inflation-protected securities can help your money keep up with rising prices. Number 2, budget smartly. Pay attention to rising costs and adjust your spending accordingly. Number 3, increase your income. If prices are rising, find ways to increase your income through earnings, through raises, side hustles, or new skills. This can affect and help offset inflation impact. Number 4, understand interest rates. When rates go up, borrowed money becomes more expensive. Make sure your loans or credit cards have the best possible terms. So, inflation is like a slow-moving tide. It affects everyone, whether we realize it or not. But understanding how inflation works gives you the power to make better financial decisions. It's not always a bad thing. Some inflation is actually necessary for a growing economy. But when it gets out of control, it can hurt people, businesses, and entire countries. Now that you know the basics of inflation, you're one step closer to being financially savvy. Thanks for watching. See you next time for another big concept explained in a fun and simple way. I will see you in the next video.